And hey, Michelle, hi.
Hey.
Welcome to this episode of, where we every week invite an industry leader and go through some important topics that really impact us in the new world, in the AI world. And we have Michelle Sipe with us. Michelle is a seasoned operations and strategy leader with SimplyIOA. She's SVP operations. SimplyIOA is a national insurance agency, and Michelle carries a decade of experience driving large-scale transformation in insurance and healthcare industry. So she has lots of experience when it comes to sales enablement, agent enablement, and she's held key positions in the past with companies like Command Investigations, One Call, Florida Blue, and so on. So, we are going to dive into a vital topic for us today, which is going to be how we are transforming agent onboarding and training using AI in the new world. And Michelle, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's get started. Michelle, we'll be going into this discussion with more like a candid chat where we would have some fun and also discuss different ways in which industry is evolving. And just to get started, would you just want to talk a little bit about your experience at Simply IOA and the transformation that it has taken in the industry and how the journey has been for you and for people around you?
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So Simply IOA is a national digital agency. And I say digital because today, and it's impossible to not do this now, is, we lead with technology, a high investment in technology enablement, not only for how we interact with our customers, but how we support our team members. And so we're a digital agency and leveraging technology in that form. We also are very heavy on data analytics and insights because being in the personal lines space and insurance in general, it's complex and it's complicated. So Simply IOA is backed by one of the top five privately held insurance brokers, Insurance Office of America. They're a very large, nationally known commercial insurer. And quite a few years ago, they started curating a personal lines book of business, and personal lines operates very different than large commercial. And so what they saw is an opportunity to serve the national market specific to personal lines, but really, really with that emphasis on enabling technology. How are we meeting our producer contacts? How are we meeting our referred business? How are we meeting consumers directly? And then more recently, we've found that we've gotten really sophisticated in approaching the homeowners market. So much like insurance, entering home ownership is complex and confusing. And so we've been able to leverage the way that we've created a knowledge base and an advisory approach in insurance, translating that into home ownership here in the United States. So right now, Simply IOA is a cloud-based, remotely staffed insurance agency. We have advisors all across the nation in both our sales and service centers that work fully remote. We are an independent insurance agency, so they know multi-state, multi-carrier, multi-product. We'll get a little bit more into why I emphasize that later on in the episode. But we are a national broker, and we specialize with mortgage servicers, subservicers, and lenders. So we find that becoming a part of the conversation around the correct coverage when you are considering homeownership or navigating homeownership, it's important. When you're applying for that application, debt to income ratio is a key element in what you qualify for. And a recent statistic that was published a few months back is that over 50% of a homeowner's mortgage payment ends up being comprised of homeowners insurance or property taxes. So it's very, very timely. It's important to make sure, that we are informing and advising those borrowers and homeowners correctly. All the while, we expect our team members to be agile and understand the market. Carriers' appetites are changing, state regulations are changing. So it is very complicated. Our name having the word simple in it doesn't do it justice, but we have a really, really powerful team of advisors that serve over 30,000 unique customers. So it's a blessing to be in this industry and help make sense of something that's very complicated.
I think, and that's precisely why you have that word in your name to make things less complex for people.
Right, exactly.
Right. Perfect. That sounds like a great introduction, and also the importance of this segment in the industry and how it's becoming bigger and more complicated. So we need advisors who can really guide us around and
Hmm.
really help us take those right decisions. And every person would have very different preferences, backgrounds, financial stability when it comes
Hmm.
to home. And home is always the special thing in people's life. So I think that sounds like a great start. So just another, as I dive into more complicated things about the industry, I feel that one more complication that really, really bothers people around is that there are so many agencies. Some are captive, some are independent, and
Exactly.
where to go, how to look at it. Can you help us understand the difference in their operating structure? And more importantly, for people who are here as business leaders and HR leaders, what is the talent sourcing or support
Hmm.
needed in each of these structures?
Yeah, perfect. So putting on our consumer lens, right? So let's say, one, it's a great reminder that specific to personal lines, your auto, your home, renter's insurance, pet, recreational vehicles, all of these kind of commoditized insurance policies, the consumer has complete control over shopping. So just because you are with one carrier today doesn't mean you have to stay with them. And that's where you start to see the difference in captive agencies and independent agencies. So your captive agencies are going to be those prominent carriers like State Farm and Allstate, where they only write their policies. And I'll get into the staffing side of this in a moment. But your captive agencies are going to be where the agent is only writing for that carrier. They're very familiar with what their risk profile type is, what their price point is, what they do and do not want. So it's very specific. It's very tailored exactly to what is going to pass through underwriting and be a qualified profile for that policy to become in force. So captive is very, very specific in what that carrier desires. They do not write other products outside of what that insurer writes. So they will only write the product lines that a State Farm or an Allstate offers, and they cannot place coverage elsewhere. The complete opposite happens in the independent agency. So independent agency, we don't use the word broker because there are brokers that are even a layer removed, but independent agents have multiple carrier appointments, and they are able to be help be more of a comparison shopper. So the consumer can talk to both captive and independent agencies and have a multitude of options. But what a regular consumer is going to feel in that interaction is very specific knowledge from a captive agent on what they can and cannot do. And then you're going to have more of a shopping experience, a comparative, hopefully a consultative experience when you're going with an independent agency that has flexibility to tailor unique risk profile types, unique property types, unique product lines, and able to actually place coverage either through a bundled option, a couple different carriers, but you're able to really appropriately shop and compare. And that's where the biggest difference for us, what we see is where brand and loyalty then translates into talent, right? But brand and loyalty is different. Most consumers will stay with a captive agency on brand, right? So Jake from State Farm or Allstate, they'll stay because they're loyal to that brand. But then in the independent agency, you really find loyalty to the advisor. They get to know the person that is reviewing coverages with them. So you have a more of an element and an emphasis on who you're hiring, because the rapport they're developing with that consumer is the relationship that gets that customer to stay and become multi-product line. So it's very different. The piece that is often lost is that as consumers, you can always shop, you can always change, you can always shop. So how do you get the customer to stay? So then that
Mm.
translates into the second part of your question, which is, kind of the premise of why we're talking today. And that is, how in the world do you source talent, right? So you would need a very different profile type, or your talent pool would be different if you're recruiting for a captive agency. For captive agencies, you can focus on who is wonderful in speaking, who is great in sales, who maybe doesn't have an insurance background, because they only need to know and learn your products, your regulations, your underwriting, and sometimes even your state. You may place them where they only need to know their resident state or that region. So for a captive agency and leaders that are thinking about, a more consolidated market segment, you can get great talent and hire for the person, knowing that you can teach the product and you can share that knowledge base. And so some of those intangibles aren't as much of a factor. Pivoting quickly into independent agencies, that's where it's a bigger challenge. You're sourcing a little bit more for a unique talent, or you have to have robust training programs around those intangibles. So when you shift into independent agencies, you now need to look at, what does onboarding look like? When they come in, do you expect them right away in onboarding to know 3 carriers? Do you expect them to know 30 carriers? Do you expect them to know one product line of home? Do you expect them to know 10 product lines of home, right? So every independent agency is going to have a different onboarding path and a different career development over the first few years of that sales agent's role. But that's where it is very, very important to look at, what do they grow into? Because then you can say, okay, here's what we need, right? Here's what we aren't training for. So yeah, it's way more sophisticated when you go down the independent agency route, because your expectation of what they're going to deliver to the consumer is now more comprehensive. It's more carriers, more states, more product lines, which ultimately means more training, development, and support for that team member.
Mm, okay. Wow, that seems like really complicated when it comes to
Mhm.
independent agencies. I cannot imagine the number that we are looking at here. Is it 100 products? Is it more than that? And knowing
Mhm.
everything, knowing what to compare, and also connecting it to customers' needs, right? So,
Right.
if I'm going, I'll just compare it with something very simple. If I'm going and buying shoes, then
Right.
I would like to look at what I prefer, which is funky styles. And
Yeah.
in that range, I want all the products, every specification. So
Mhm.
it's so much more complex that I have like different shoes options for something that I would prefer, and
Right.
aligning customer expectations to these range of hundreds of products and
Mhm.
carriers is so much more complex, right? So
Yeah,
I
in
can
your example
imagine
of,
that.
yeah, I'd say in your example of shoes, it would, and shoes and insurance are very different. But even
Yeah.
just in the example of shoes, if you are interested in looking, for a couple of pairs of shoes, but the person you're speaking to can only talk to you about a sneaker, and that she's, that individual, she or he, is never going to speak about either a comfort option versus a training
Yeah.
option, a casual versus a business look. So if you're talking with an individual that really, really knows this one shoe, they'll be great at selling that one shoe. And maybe that ends up being a shoe that you buy. But if you're speaking to a sales individual who's able to show you options and consider, here's a shoe that you can wear more than once. Here's a one-time event shoe. Here's something that if you can dress it up, you can dress it down. So now I'm really stretching comparing insurance to shoes, but that's where you see the difference of experience of, finding that captive sales advisor who really just knows that product, or that offering, and can only give you that what you need for that type, versus someone who's able to listen to your lifestyle, listen to your needs, and be a little bit more agile in how they shape up the offering and have alternative things to consider that you may not have considered, right? That's the big difference.
Yeah, I know. And as a consumer, I would definitely, if I'm going for options, if I'm going to an independent agency, that's my basic expectation, that you
Right.
should know what stage I am in my life, what kind of home
Mhm.
am I looking at, and then, what's my really financial portfolio as well.
Mhm.
What's my asset looking like, right? So
Yeah.
all of that being evaluated and then giving me right options to choose
Yeah.
from is so much more complicated.
It is. And the part that we oftentimes don't mention, so I want to make sure we say it here, is that when you're shopping for insurance, the real premise behind this is fear of what could happen, right? So you have to have an insurance policy for what may happen. And when you get into specifics around coverages, we have to have real conversations with consumers like, if your neighbor's tree falls on your house, that's different than a tree on your property. If there's flooding, so there you also have to find talent that is able to navigate real hypothetical situations that can trigger an emotional response from the consumer, because that consumer may have an elderly parent that they're caring for, or may have young children. And so when speaking about insurance, there's also a delicacy around covering for things that could happen, and that fear component. So not and no one ever said insurance was simple, that's for sure. But when you think about who you're hiring, it's so important that you source the right talent that supports your onboarding path and structure, and then you have the tools in place to continue to develop them, because it's a required coverage, and sometimes families have to enact on that insurance policy, and it's a lifeline for them.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing perspective, Michelle. Thank you so much. I'm
Yeah,
just
of
really
course.
enjoying this conversation, but I'm also mindful of time, so maybe a
Sure.
couple of questions I'll
Yeah,
skip
let's do
and
it.
I'll come to some of my favorite ones where I really need answer. So, this 16-week affair of nesting and onboarding, uh, do you really think that something is wrong? What's slowing things down, and how
Yeah.
can we really accelerate them?
Yeah, so the hard hitting points here is if I'll stay on the independent agencies aside. So you're limited by what your carriers can enable. So you have some carriers that are very tech forward. Their interfaces, their application are quick. They're enriching datas, and so you don't have to train as much to know some of the slower archaic processes. So it always starts with, what is the work that the agent is doing. So when you're working with older systems and things that aren't automated, you have to, if you're on the phone, have time fillers. You have to be able to keep the customer engaged. And then you overlay, well, what is the agency doing, right? Are they using an older rating system? Are they using an older telephony system? Please tell me they have a CRM system. Are they manually sending emails? So while you're on the phone with a customer, and an average handle time in an insurance call should be around the 6-minute mark, what are you giving your agents to help them progress the conversation along and keep the confidence with the consumer? And oh, by the way, appropriately cover the property. So 16 weeks is definitely a standard, unfortunately. And what's even crazier about that is some agencies would say after 16 weeks, this person is only proficient on 2 product lines in 2 states. I would be very impressed to hear of any agency that after 16 weeks can throw an agent straight into the sales floor across all carriers, all product lines, right? So it is 16 weeks to become productive, and every agency would have a different metric for what productive means and how much they limit what they're exposing that agent to. And then a question becomes, okay, well, how do you grow that, right? If they come on with only 2 products in 2 states, do they ever get to more products? Do they ever get to more states? So there is a challenge in the fact that it takes 16 weeks to become proficient in something. And then a question for that organization is definitely, how are you investing in the continued growth of that advisor so they can be more productive and serve clients even better?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's so true. And I believe that what I heard, a lot of our clients talk about is attrition, right? In
Yeah.
that 16-week period, people are like, okay, sales is not for me. This is not for me. I cannot do this.
Hmm.
And people leave, right? Even before they
Hmm.
give themselves a chance, they just
Hmm.
leave. So that just compounds the whole problem of nesting.
It does, and that's where the tools that you're using to gauge where a person is proficient is important, because you want to get ahead of someone who starts dropping in confidence, right? Let's say that you're talking about overcoming objections, and you have someone who's phenomenal on the phone, but they just aren't the personality type to be what feels to them pushy. How can you provide an assessment and have a positive pivot, right? We talk about positive pivots instead of saying, well, you're not good at this. We don't want you. Let's positively pivot you into some alternative coaching, alternative role playing, and get ahead of their lack of confidence so they aren't leaving you, because then you're going to have that team member bought in that you are improving an area where they aren't strong, or you're doing a positive pivot into a different role type where they are going to be successful. So it's so important to have that awareness through the tools that you're using, the tests, the assessments, to gauge that and get ahead of a candidate or a prospect that is going to leave out of fear, that they're not good enough, right? We need to help show them that we're invested in helping them be more than good enough.
Yeah, and I think that's an amazing point, right? That everybody has a different starting point, and
Right.
it's not that they are bad in everything. It's just
Right.
some points, some places where they need to really work harder, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not that everything is wrong. There are
Right.
certain things which are good and some things which are not working out, and we'll help you enable you to build on
Yeah,
those, right?
exactly.
So, yeah, confidence. I think in our experience, also confidence boosting is one of the major factors that users have spoken about. That now we can talk to the customers with more confidence, right? So
Exactly.
we feel good about ourselves. So I think, Michelle, as we approach the last part of the talk show, I would like to just give like a more trailer of our next episode where
Sure.
we'll be talking about digitalization of agent org, insurance agencies, and how
Mhm.
AI will transform the way we look at our agent performance and productivity. So that's the topic that we'll dive more specifically into our next episode. But just like few comments, last comments on how AI, how are you seeing AI
Mhm.
really transforming the whole onboarding and training experience?
Yeah, I think that it's important for all of us, especially in leadership, to break down the narrative that AI replaces a position or AI replaces a role. AI is an enabler, right? So when you pivot and think of it that way, that you can leverage accelerating feedback, accelerating information to a training department, to a talent acquisition team, to your people leaders, you're accelerating that information kind of to what we said before, and you're getting ahead of maybe where that team member starts to feel deficient or lesser than. So what we're seeing is, for those that are open to AI, and there's different forms of AI. But when you look at using those tools to support accelerating feedback, you are able to have positive coaching and you're not reactively coaching, right? So you're able to quickly show trends, quickly reinforce certain areas, and those that are going to be able to one keep up with definitely Gen X, but this wave of talent coming in, it's speed of information, speed of feedback. So those that are introducing like the Eubrics product, call role playing, what that's doing is not replacing a trainer. It's actually accelerating the capacity at which a trainer can serve those trainees and those that are in onboarding, right? So now a trainer is able to repurpose that time that they were spent one-on-one doing human role playing and human interaction, and have an unbiased, standard out there that everyone interacts with. And then you're able to accelerate the feedback to those that need to maybe go into a different module and spend time here, or a separate module and spend time there. So it's important that us as leaders do not act as if AI is coming in to replace every human. It's actually just going to enable a higher value add where there is human enablement. So your trainers are going to be more valuable, they're going to be more informed, they're going to have better decision making tools and analytics for them. It is only going to make your strong talent and training teams even all the more powerful to serve not only your employees but ultimately your customers. It really just levels up that information loop to your employees. So there's a couple different ways that people are leveraging AI, but I would encourage every leader that's considering it. If you're considering it, I hope you're already starting to use it. But definitely keep that positive spin, because your employees should be happy to have this powerful information loop to them, and it is only going to make them do their jobs better. happier at their jobs. They'll feel more empowered, more informed, and a happier employee is higher productivity, which is great business for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those lines where I think my two key takeaways from what you shared just now would be speed of feedback, right? So instant feedback, speed of feedback is so much more accessible today. And, trainers thinking not just serving employees, but serving customers. So they can think backwards, they can talk to the business, they can see what customers need, and then at that speed, they can
Yep.
train the workforce. Wow, I just love that. So, with that, I'm going to open the floor for some questions. And yeah, before we conclude, audience, thank you for attending this session. Can you please tell us some of the questions that you have? We're happy to take those. Okay. Yes. We have a couple of questions here. One question comes, do you believe, Mansi says, do you believe simulated call practice via AI bots will become standard in agent training across insurance industry?
It should to a degree, right? So there are standards, there are required disclosures. A call flow effectively is pretty standard. So when you can introduce a tool that is unbiased and can manage to standards and then quickly report back to benchmarks, it just accelerates what, previously would take an extra 3 or 4 days. And then you run the risk, of FTEs calling out or any kind of attrition in your training team. So I think it is required, and it should be standard. It really just, the benefits outweigh any of the risk. And as long as you have the proper controls and continuity around sustaining that enablement tool, it absolutely should be a standard.
Amazing. That sounds like a great future for us, Michelle. I'm very happy to hear that. Oh, awesome. So, audience, any other questions you have, please feel free. Otherwise, we are,
I see
yeah.
Lucas says, what were some of the biggest mindset shifts needed internally when you began implementing AI-driven tools for agent onboarding? So I think a part of that would be leadership education, right? So our technology teams and our partners shouldn't just be talking at leadership and only saying AI. I think we should unpack it to a level. We should say, is it generative? Is it large language model? Like we do have to educate leadership because the technology is a fast track growing. And so I think it's important that you create champions within the business that understand not, hey, this is just AI, right? That's way too generalized. Understand how it's powered and enough of how it works to be a champion of that enablement tool. And then that shifts the mindset away from a scary robot coming in and taking our jobs. No, it's just speed of information and feedback. And I think you can step into it. So I would say find your champions and make sure that your partners are sharing more than just the elevator pitch and acronyms of that tool.
So true. We always need champions in the organizations to really run
Yeah.
this. Awesome. We are getting a lot of questions, Michelle. Maybe a few more minutes would be great.
Yeah, I'll hit them quick.
So,
Okay, so Brian says, what does a future ready insurance agent look like you in 2025? Well, we're halfway through 2025, so I'll actually answer that probably more into 2026. So a future ready insurance agent, I actually think needs to know more about insurance and the carrier intricacies, right? Some of those skills would be an aptitude for understanding, you are covering someone's largest financial asset. We have to bring back the human element of why we're serving the insurance market. I don't know a lot of people that say, oh, I want to get into insurance. It kind of just happens. That's how it was for me. But I think it's really important that the future agent pivots more into an advisor. You have a responsibility to help care for this consumer and make sure that you're protecting from something that could happen to their largest financial asset. Those become non-negotiable because AI and technology and all the tools that are coming out and about and the way applications and systems are working with each other. Your CRMs are becoming faster, the emails are sending themselves, the texts are sending themselves, bots are having rudimentary conversations themselves. And the human element, that high value add for an agent, is more of an advisor. And I think that's where we need to really, really emphasize how we talk to that talent pool, how we talk to our employees about the importance of the role that they play in this transaction, that becomes non-negotiable. Everything else becomes a knowledge learning center, a tool that can help. There's so much that's emerging in support of those workflows, but your non-negotiables actually emphasize when you do have a human touch, the why behind being an insurance agent. I think that is oftentimes lost because we pull that word sales in and then everyone thinks it's just making sales.
Wow, that's amazing.
Cool. Okay, I think we hit the key questions, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have. Yes.
Okay. And we
Awesome.
do have another episode. So as you mentioned, I would say we're gonna really, really, this was a setting the stage. We're really gonna unpack next. So I'm sure you have a path forward, but it will even take questions that we can answer in the next episode. I'm an open book. Really, really passionate about how we find the right talent in this space. Because not everyone comes out of university or college wanting to get into insurance. So how do we change the perception around insurance? How do we change the perception around call centers, contact centers, and take care of our people? Because when we take care of our people, they take care of our customers.
Yes, absolutely. And I always had that delightful experience of talking to you, understanding intricacies of insurance as an industry. And I'm sure that when we dive into really the technology part of it and how we are looking at AIization of insurance
Mm-hmm.
industry, that will bring a lot of value for insurance agents.
Exactly.
So yes, with on that note, really thank you for joining us today, Michelle. And in the next week, we are going to unpack AIization of insurance agencies. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can write back to us and we'll circulate to Michelle. Till then, thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.